Hello, everybody. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. This week, we're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution and reform in 1800s America. So before we begin, please make sure you have your note taker out and that as we are going through, you are defining the key terms as well as answering the big question. Okay, that's how you get credit for this. So our big question today: what factors led to a rapid increase in urbanization? How were minority and women groups affected by these changes? So you're going to want to have those in the back of your mind as we're going through this presentation so that you can understand the push and pull factors, especially of urbanization and immigration into America. All right, so we're talking about an industrial revolution. What is that? Well, most people at the beginning of the 1700s were farmers who made most of what they needed by hand, right? We did not have this technology yet readily available. And so most things are made the old-fashioned way. Skilled workers such as blacksmiths, carpenters, and shoemakers made goods by hand in the towns. Things were expensive and it was slow and it was by hand. People began using machines to make the manufacturing process more efficient, also making it cheaper, right? So people could consume even more. The Industrial Revolution, a period of rapid growth using machines to make goods, arose in Great Britain in the mid-1700s. So the Industrial Revolution was characterized by changes in the manufacturing process, right? So machines replaced hand tools, products made from interchangeable parts were cheaper, laborers in factories were paid hourly wages. Going back really quick, new technologies in the early 19th century, such as the telegraph and steam locomotive, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, also had a tremendous impact on society. It was now possible to communicate and travel further and faster than ever before. The textile industry. So the first breakthrough in the Industrial Revolution was in how textiles or cloth goods were made. Merchants built textile mills near rivers and streams. Great Britain soon built the world's most productive textile manufacturing industry. The textile industry arose in the Northeast, introducing the Industrial Revolution to the United States. So originally, these had to be near water. Why? Because it was water that powered the factories, okay? So we'll see in a minute how that changes and leads to urbanization as steam becomes a new power source. All right, so let's take a look still at the factory system. The factories brought workers and machinery together in one place to produce goods. The use of machinery meant that a worker could produce more goods than ever before and didn't have to be skilled in any particular trade. Factory jobs usually involve simple, repetitive tasks done for low pay. The mill industry filled jobs by hiring whole families and paying children low wages. So it was very common at this point for children to work. School was not a mandatory thing like we have now. And so the children went to work. So here's a picture of a mill. Okay. So we have this Lowell Mill Girl. So Frances Cabot Lowell created a new system of mill manufacturing in 1814 called the Lowell system. The Lowell system involved employing young, unmarried women who were housed in boarding houses, also known as the mill girls. Having mills that included both spinning thread and weaving in the same plant. So you can see how this would, by keeping the women isolated, they could work longer hours. Here's an example of a primary source of a woman working in a mill and also a child working in a mill. A lot of times their job would be to gather up the scraps and clean. All right, so why is this important? Well, the Lowell girls organized to reform working conditions. Why is this a big deal? It leads to the formation of a union that then protects the workers, okay? So there was deteriorating working conditions. Employees worked 12 to 14 hours, incredibly unhealthy conditions. Guys, the pollution at this point is horrific, okay? The pollution, there's no safety measures really, okay? It's overcrowded, it's stuffy, there's no air conditioning, right? So it is incredibly unhealthy conditions. Wages of factory workers dropped as they competed for jobs. So not only are the working conditions horrible, they would basically pin the people against each other fighting for a job, which made it so that the owners of the factories could pay the people even less. Okay, so this is just horrible. So labor unions formed. Lowell workers formed labor unions to gain higher wages and better working conditions. Unions are organized associations of workers who form to protect their rights. The labor unions staged protests called strikes. They refused to work until employees met their demands. And also to keep in mind, which we don't really talk about much in this unit, is unions were really bad for the business. So the owners of the factories would try to break up these unions, and sometimes with force, many times with force and threat to families and loved ones in order to make the workers too fearful or scared to follow through or become part of the union. All right, let's talk about some of the transportation and communication revolution. You'll see this is a pretty big deal. So steam-powered locomotives linked cities by rail. Okay, remember previously it would take forever to get from one city to another. There was no highways. There was no interstates. Okay, these things did not exist. If you wanted to go, it would take a really long time. There wasn't paved roads like we have now. Peter Cooper raced his Tom Thumb locomotive against a horse in 1830, proving its power and speed despite losing because of a breakdown near the end of the race. About 30,000 miles of railroads linked American cities by 1860. The US economy surged as railroads moved goods cheaply to distant markets. All right, here is a picture of what these early locomotive looks like. All right, let's talk about the telegraph. Maybe some of you have heard about the telegraph. It is very hard to say. In 1832, Samuel F.B. Morse perfected the telegraph, a device that could send information over wires, guys. So you got to think of this like an early telephone, okay? This is like the early telephone. The device did not catch on until the 1844 Democratic National Convention, when the nomination was telegraphed to Washington. A Morse associate created Morse code to communicate messages over the wires. The telegraph grew with the railroad. The first transcontinental railroad line was completed in 1861. So the Morse code, if you've heard of that, is like, it's a series of taps that convey information. All right, so let's see, we're still going through. That is what a telegraph looks like. All right, so let's talk about the shift to steam power. I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. The shift from water power to steam power allowed owners to build factories anywhere. Factories were shifted closer to cities and transportation centers. Most cities were in the north. People in all areas of the nation had access to products made and grown far away because of steamboats and locomotives. Cities and towns grew up along railroad tracks. Cities became centers of industrial growth. All right, so we want to really, the stars are there because I really want you to understand urbanization, okay? This is going to be incredibly important for you to know. You should be making a note about it in your notes right now, okay? So urbanization refers to a population shift from rural to urban areas or cities. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people in the US lived in rural areas. Excuse me, I'm a little bit tired today. The advances of the Industrial Revolution, new transportation and communication technologies, and increasing immigration promoted rapid urbanization, guys. Remember, before this, most people lived out in the country, right? They are farmers. They are just living in little villages or kind of spread out in rural areas, but all of a sudden, you know, what do? People go to where the money is. Where the money is there in these factories, right? And now these factories are in these city centers, near transportation hubs, so that once the goods are made, they can be shipped out quickly and more money can be made. So the advances of the Industrial Revolution improved transportation and communication. Immigration and migration from rural to urban areas all factored into promoting urbanization. As cities grew and the factory system became part of American life, pollution became rampant and working conditions were often poor. This is also what led to the labor unions really coming up, right? Like I said a minute ago. All right, so let's look very closely at this graph. I want you to really look closely at it. You need to understand what this is telling you. So these are the factors that are really promoting urbanization. Okay, so we have the advances of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, well, what kind of advances did we have, right? We have the switch from water power to steam power, right? We have the switch, we have people who are figuring out the process to make things quicker, like in the case of the mill factory. Okay, we have these advances of being able to ship things, and then we go down to improve transportation and communication. We're able to ship things faster and further. They can take orders, right, from further away in order to get things. You no longer needed to live near where the maker was. Okay, and then we have immigration and migration from rural areas. Well, like I said before, people go to where money is. So if there's no longer a need for handmade goods and people are wanting to make more money, they're going to go where the money is, and that's in the cities. That's in this urbanization. All right, so, and this graph is really great to kind of give you an idea of what this is like, okay? Oh, sorry. So we can see here the light colored gray is going to be the rural areas, how many people per million live in the rural areas. And you can see that as we start in 1860, the majority of people are in rural areas. And by 1930, there's a massive shift to people being in more urban areas. All right, let's talk about the Reform era and the women's rights movement. Okay, that's what's happening now. All right, so there's a swift cultural change in the early 1800s brought about by several movements with the intent on social reform. Okay, so this is going to be important for you to understand what social reform is. Social reform is an organized attempt to improve what is unjust or imperfect in a society. So right now, as you're watching this, can you think of some social reforms that are happening right now? Okay, healthcare would be a social reform that is underway right now. Okay, our higher education and whether or not higher education like universities and colleges should be free. This is an attempt at social reform today. Okay, so during the reform era back then, efforts were made to reform education, prison, the treatment of marginalized groups, and end slavery. Okay, so really some of these things are really not that different than what we are trying to reform today. All right, so there were several causes of the rise of social reform movements. There was religious movements that focused on individual good deeds, artistic and philosophical movements, the growth of the middle class in urban areas, right? Pre this, there really was no middle class. You were pretty much a rural farmer or an aristocrat. That was pretty much how that worked, okay? So now we have this idea of middle class. So women as the driving force for reform because they are more independent, no longer kept at home, and now have a voice predominantly in the church, right? Remember with this industrialization, we have more women going to work than ever before. All right, let's see. Let's just make sure I hit everything. They led the reform on prison reform, on the treatment of the mentally ill. The women also, and I'm talking about this in a minute, is led the movement for the temperance campaign, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So the temperance movement, okay? See the stars? What does that mean? You're taking notes. You're making sure you understand what the temperance movement is, okay? In 1830, Americans drink an average of 5 gallons of liquor a year. So the temperance movement undertook to eliminate social problems caused by the consumption of alcohol. They want to curb drinking, okay? In 1826, the American Temperance Society was founded, taking voluntary abstinence as its goal. Voluntary abstinence means not doing it at all, so not drinking at all, okay? Reformers argue that drinking causes domestic violence, public rowdiness, and loss of family income, okay? So they are trying to make it so they believe that alcohol is causing most of these problems, and that if they can get rid of the consumption of alcohol, they will drastically improve many of the social problems facing the country. All right, so here is a political cartoon that dramatizes the problems caused by alcohol consumption. So take a minute, 10, 20 seconds, and compare the two. So what do you see? Okay, on the left, we see this family. They have a nice mirror behind them, a nice clock. Dad is present, dressed nice. The kids are coming to dad. They're happy he's home. Looks like maybe he just came home from a hard day at work. Look at mom in the background, looking lovingly over them while stirring maybe dinner. She's dressed nice. There's dolls on the floor. You know, they look like they're doing a little bit better. And then we look on the right. So this man who's been drinking and he's smoking a pipe, he's asleep and drunk. You can see that, you know, there's a paper on the floor and the woman is like desperate to get his attention. You can see that they're living a little more squalor. You can see patches on her dress. You can see cracks in where they're living. Things are not in good condition. All right, so let's talk about the women's rights movement. So keeping in mind, you guys, this is all going on at the same time. These was sometimes when you guys are thinking about history, you're thinking that everything is in a linear order, but a lot of these things are overlapping and spurring each other, okay? So keep that in mind as we're going through this. So when slavery abolitionists divided over the issue of female participation, women found it easy to identify with the situation of slaves, okay? Women were not treated great during this time. Their job really was viewed as being home, taking care of the house, and you'll see in a second, they really had very few rights, okay? So they viewed themselves as they are learning more and more, getting more and more educated. They're saying, whoa, 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 like we're kind of being treated as slaves. And so they start seeing what's happening with the slaves and feeling like they're viewing it as similar to how they feel. So in 1848, feminist reform led to Seneca Falls Convention. So what is the significance? This launched the modern women's rights movement, established the arguments and the program for the women's rights movement for the remainder of the century. Okay, so let's look at why this is a big deal, okay? So in the early 19th century, women unable to vote. Legal status of a minor. So that means even if you were a grown woman, you are not even considered a full adult, okay? Let that sink in. There was no turning 18 and then you're like an adult or a woman. No, no. You were basically considered a minor. If you were single, you could own your own property. If you were married, no control over her property or her children. You could not initiate a divorce. Only the man could do that. You couldn't make wills. You couldn't sign a contract. You couldn't bring a suit in court without your husband's permission. You were essentially the property of your husband, okay? So the first women's rights movement was in Seneca Falls, New York in 1849. Educational and professional opportunities, property rights, legal equality, repeal of laws awarding the father custody of the children in divorce, and suffrage rights. So you have to keep in mind, before this, if a woman got divorced, the children automatically went to the husband, the ex-husband, okay? So, because they weren't really considered an adult, right? All right, so the following is an excerpt from the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I want you to really notice that the language and wording is similar to the Declaration of Independence. They were really influenced by the founders. Okay, again, we see that star. That means we really need to be thinking closely about this. All right, so I want you to really pay attention. Okay, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. Okay, if you go through and read the rest of this, you can see that the rest of the wording is basically essentially the same as what's in the Declaration of Independence, except for we have this addition of men and women. All right, so let's talk about immigration and nativism. Immigration to the US greatly increased in the 1800s with the promise of economic opportunity being the main pull factor, right? That's what's pulling them in. All right, so more than 4 million immigrants settled in the US between 1840 and 1860. The main pull factor, right? We see those stars, we know, I need to know this, okay? The main pull factor that drew immigrants was the promise of economic opportunities, okay? Most arrived from European countries. Over 3 million were from Ireland and Germany, okay? So that means that 3/4 of the people that came were from Ireland and Germany. All right, so also going with this, we want to make sure that you understand that the Irish potato famine, so this is going to be some of those push factors, okay, that brought them to America, that pushed them out of Ireland to America. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s led many Irish to emigrate to the US in search of a better life. Men worked as unskilled laborers in factories or building canals and railroads. Women often worked as domestics. That means in the home, washing clothes, working as maids, cooks, things like that. Despite harsh conditions, low wages, and poor housing, many saw America as a land of equality and opportunity. Most Irish immigrants were Catholic. All right, so we have an anti-immigration movement. I think you can see over the history that we've covered so far, this seems to be a theme on and off pretty much through all of America's history, including to what's happening today. So industrial jobs in the Northeast attracted many people. Many native-born workers feared losing their jobs to incoming immigrants who were willing to work for lower wages. Americans also mistrusted Catholic immigrants because of the history of conflict between European Protestants and Catholics. So I think it's important to make the connection right now to what's happening in America. This same type of anti-immigration rhetoric is happening right now towards people who are coming from south of the border, Mexico, Central America, and South America. The same ridiculous way of thinking is happening today. So people still haven't learned their lesson. So hopefully you can learn your lesson as you become an adult and make sure that this anti-immigrant idea does not continue. So no Irish need apply. Nativists believed in a policy of promoting the interests of native inhabitants against those of immigrants. In 1849, nativists founded the Know Nothing Party, which tried to limit immigration. Okay, you can see based on those signs, this is probably similar to a certain president who was just in office and what his party was trying to say and promote. So unfortunately, nativist belief still persists. So the Know Nothings use slogans like Americans First to raise anti-immigration sentiment. This might sound familiar to one that was just happening, saying make America great again and wanting to build walls, okay? So this is still happening. As you are learning this history, I hope you are always trying to compare what happened in the past to what's happening today, because that is the whole point of you learning history. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, And I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day.